I don't know why I always laugh at first. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the executive director for Idaho Ripple Effect, and I'm doing an interview today with Ron Nielsen. He's our chairman of the board, and this video is going to be posted on the IdahoRippleEffect.com under the Meet the Board section. And so, Ron, I appreciate you. How are you?
I'm good, Tom. How are you?
I'm well, man. Thank you for taking the time to be able to put yourself out there with me. It's always good to align yourself with good folks, and I feel like you're one of the best ones. So I appreciate you joining me.
Well, it's very kind of you, and it's good to be here. So I'm glad we were able to find the time to hook up.
And it's good that you've
It's been
got
kind of
the
crazy lately.
it's good that you've got the internet in the forest, behind you. Um, I think the people are going to ask, how is it that he can be that deep in the forest and still have good internet? So
Satellites, people. That's all you need are satellites.
yeah. Well, as part of the tribute to the Meet the Board series, I really believe that it's important that I believe in relationships. I believe it's really important for people with inquiring minds, whether it's an organization or anything relating to a person, is to understand them. And the best way to understand them is to hear things from their own voice. And so, part of you being on here, well, the reason you're on here is to be able to do that. So, what I'd like you to do is, Ron, tell us where you came from and kind of how you got here, where you're at today.
Sure, sure. Well, so I was initially born in Oregon, which is I'm going to tell you where I was born in the county that I was born, and people are going to go, "Hey, that rings a bell." I was born in Harney County, Oregon,
Huh.
where they had the Malheur County standoff. So Um, I've got links back there, family back there and stuff. And my grandfather, he owned a logging company in Burns, Oregon, Smirsky Logging. And so all of my uncles and all the brothers and all that stuff, they all worked for my grandfather at the time. And at some point, my father's sister had established themselves, her and her husband, in Nampa, Idaho. And so my dad was talking to his sister, and he told her, "Hey, we got some acreage here. We could sell you an acre of land, and you can move your family here and set up shop here." And so my dad did that because he was looking at job opportunities in Idaho. And I think he wanted to have his children be in a more farm oriented environment. So he packed up the family and we moved to Beverly. Oh, just kidding. Uh, we packed up the family. We moved to Idaho and went to school in West Junior High, Napa High School, and had a really rough time. It didn't work out all that well for our family at the time. There were just My dad had made some marriage decisions that just didn't work out very well, and some elements got into our lives that were not very good elements. And I don't want to get too much into that, but it the family ended up dissolving. I left home when I was 15, and turned, there's just a lot of brokenness, let's say. My dad was in Vietnam, saw a lot of stuff that really affected him, and he was raising me, my brother, and my sister on his own, and he just wasn't faring well, right? He had too much to contend with children that he didn't know how to raise, and what man really does intrinsically, right? It's something that you have to learn, and it's not an inherent skill that men have. But he was trying to do that because he got custody of us from my mother when we were very young, and that was a bad situation there as well. And so it was just your typical broken family and this sort of thing, and there was a lot of abuse, and it manifested in all of our lives, and the normal ways. And so this this led to kind of a dissolution of the family. I left, like I said, I left home when I was 15 years out, went out into the world, was working ever since, right? And eventually roamed around a bit, doing different types of jobs, realized that I wanted to become a carpenter, went to school for that. There was a program, union-based program in Oregon that I got involved in, and graduated from the program. It was a Job Corps program. but I got an education in carpentry, and I graduated top of my class and all that stuff. And then now I had a trade skill that I could go out into the world and apply. And so I went out and swung a hammer and was really good at it. And ended up, building a family. I've been married a couple times, and first marriage didn't work out so hot, but I did get custody of like my dad did. It's funny how you can follow your parents to some degree. Like your life can kind of emulate your
No.
parents. Yeah, and it's just weird. I wouldn't have thought that when I was younger. In fact, I was like, yeah, there ain't no way I'm gonna follow my dad's footsteps. Well, be careful what you say, because that's sort of how life goes. It's just really strange. And no matter what decisions you make, things will come full circle that direction. Anyway, so I got custody of my son from my first wife and started raising him. And about 25 years old, this is all happening, right? And that's when I became a disciple, right? So, group of disciples from the four square churches, which later became the International Churches of Christ. They were door knocking, and they knocked on my door. So picture this, all right? So they knock on my door. I open up the door, and here's this guy with long hair. I got a guitar in my hands because I was playing in a band, and I open up the door. They hear music and they're like, "What the heck?" So I open up the door. Here I am with a guitar and my long flowing hair. I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Uh oh, we knocked on the wrong door." So the and it just happened to be the pastor of the church that knocked on the door. And I could tell he was just like, he didn't want to talk. He was looking at me going, here's this big burly, guy with long hair with a guitar. He's like, man, but he took a chance. He's like, I want to invite you to church. I'm like, hey, what a coincidence. I've been reading the Bible virtually every day. So I'm ready. And so he invited me to church, and I studied the Bible with him for about 2 weeks and decided I wanted to be in the discipleship program. So that started my foray into Christianity. So I did the discipleship program for about 5 years, which was, man, my life changed dramatically. Right, the discipleship program just really changed my life around big time, which I needed it, right? Because I didn't understand. So there was something that was going on that I just didn't understand at the time. God had a plan for me, and it didn't require long hair holding a guitar. Okay, it's something very different. So, and he was taking me through what I needed to go through to get me to where he needed me to get to, which is right here, right now. But anyway, so that path, went through the discipleship program. And then I ended up leaving the discipleship program, but you never really stop being a Christian or a disciple, right? Um, so I've got this child, and I get married a second time, and it kind of goes wrong again. And so we split up. I built us a house. We live in, a real nice house that I built for us. And she got it all. And I just walked away with my son and, just my few possessions, and started all over again. And I was making great money. I was swinging a hammer for different big companies in the valley, Record Steel and CPC, and building bridges and water treatment plants and traveling around the United States. And I created, well, in the Western states, like out New Mexico and Montana, and I was traveling for work. But I had created Sons of the Republic in Idaho in response to two things. One, I was in a fight for my children with my second wife.
Mhm.
And I realized that the judicial system was stacked heavily against me. Now, I didn't know why, didn't understand it, but she had all the rights. I virtually had zero rights in this situation. And I didn't like this. It was not a good situation for me to be in. But I realized that there were a lot of men similarly situated across the United States in these situations. So I realized, okay, there's a problem in the legal sector. And it was at this somewhere in the middle of all this is when I realized that God was taking me through this so that I could see it. but I didn't know this at the time. So I see this problem in the legal sector. And in 2008, we had the 2008 the housing crash, housing market crash, and my carpenter pension, which I was relying on for my retirement, I ended up losing most of it, and other men that I was working with lost, if not all of theirs, most of theirs. And between what I was going through with my divorce with this woman and what I was seeing happen to my fellow workers, I realized, okay, men are in a bad situation in the United States, and I'm wondering how the hell we got here, right?
Mhm.
And I needed some answers, and I realized that the problem was structural. It was structural. So I started Sons of the Republic in an effort to try to get some answers and to act as a government sort of oversight watchdog group. And we recruited some heavy
That's where I
hitters.
met
There
you.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, Steve Monroe and Blaine Sakut, and there were a lot of people that were aligning with what it is that we were trying to do, and we were hardcore researchers. And um,
But tell us
we
so just for clarification here, so people don't think that have these preconceived notions about who we are. What was it that Sons of the Republic, Ron, what did you create it to do?
Well, what I wanted to do was seek out, I wanted two things for myself. I wanted some level of influence that I could use to change the status quo of the way that American men are being dealt with, and at least in the state of Idaho, right?
Right.
My 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 ambitions started off fairly small in that I saw this huge problem with men having levels of influence to be able to change some of the structure that was no longer in favor of men,
Okay.
right? And then secondly, I wanted to look into the structural problem that led to the 2008 crash that seemingly was, I mean, it was against all Americans. It wasn't just isolated to white males, right? Or
Mhm.
any other men in the United States for that matter. But I saw intuitively some level of connection in the problem, right? I think the 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 level of problem that I was experiencing as a single father trying to raise a child, I saw the systemic problem in the structure in which children's health, child protective services, all these government entities that were established supposedly to in favor of the child, to look out for the well-being of children, they appear to be more predatory than anything else toward men. And I saw the same predation wherever I looked, right? And so I thought, well, okay, let's seek some sort of political influence, because without political influence, you're not changing anything.
Mhm.
You need to be able to talk to people at a political level that's high enough to where people are understanding what it is that you're saying, and they can listen to you and say, okay, I recognize the level of the problem. Politicians, right?
Mhm.
So we were trying to gather influence, and we were trying to research the nature of the problem so that we could address the nature of the problem. But here's what occurred. As we researched the nature of the problem, it became obvious after just a little bit of time, after a couple of years, that the problem was much larger than we all thought.
Mhm.
And so that's when MJ, Michael James Anthony, approached me one day. He was coming to our meetings on a regular basis, and he liked what we were trying to get done. He thought, that the gathering of and you have to understand, we were meeting with legislators, we were meeting with anybody who would meet with us, and having lunches with them, and whatever, and just one-on-one conversations, and just trying to get the doors open, right? Um, and so during all of this stuff, Michael James Anthony had asked for a meeting with me one time. So we met at a restaurant in downtown Boise, And he had his constitutional encyclopedia, and then I've told this story before in some of our interviews where he slides it over me, and it's Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. And I read that because it was that clause of the Constitution was actually based upon a court decision called Downs versus Bidwell, in which there was a group of people in the United States that had used that court case and an excerpt out of that court case to create something called the Restore America Plan that we were involved in. Now, the Restore America Plan was a group of people, Tim Turner, Sam Kennedy, that had got together, and they were telling everybody in the United States that what they were being told by the United States military was that we had to create. Now, I know how this sounds, but just hear me out. That we had to create citizens grand juries. We had to review all of the corruption from the Clinton era, and they wanted us to pass judgment on some of these things like uranium one scandal and different things that had gone on in the Clinton. They wanted actual judgments. Well, so we said, what the heck? What There's nothing in this that's going to hurt us. Let's just do it. And besides, I think a citizens grand jury is a phenomenal idea. Wonderful idea. Right? One of the things that you're going to learn in a citizens grand jury is you're going to learn how all of this stuff is works, and you should learn how it's supposed to work, right? So we went through that whole process and issued those opinions and this sort of thing. And of course, this group called the Restore America Plans, they were the elders of the Republic. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these letters, and in these letters, we're going to send them to all 51 governors of the United States and contiguous United States. And we're going to tell these governors that they're going to swear allegiance to the United States Constitution, or we're going to remove them with a military detail. So we thought, hey, this is a wonderful idea, because one of the things that we were doing in our research is researching in the state how much corruption there was in the states, and whether or not the governors of the states were actually even allegiant to the United States anymore, because there appeared to be foreign powers in the United States and the states that were peddling influence. You saw this with the Chinese wanting to build a city in
Of
southern
the foreign
portion of
trade
Idaho.
zones. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were seeing all this and trying to do the research on that. We are going, hey, man, there's something not right here, because the governor of the state of Idaho doesn't have any influence and any ownership or any authority over federal land. And yet the federal government wasn't saying a word about it. Not one word, almost as if the land was just being given to the governor to make that level of decision, even though there's no legislation for this. You see the same scandal in the uranium one. So obviously there was something going on there that we didn't understand. So we thought it was a good idea to shake the tree and see what fell out. Right.
Mhm.
So we didn't expect anything to come of it, other than there was going to come something was going to come to the surface from this. And I wanted to see what it was. While at the same time, MJ had convinced me to look into Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 in the federal land issue, because he told me, he goes, Ron, I just sense there's a connection here. I don't know what it is, but I sense there's a connection. So it was MJ. Okay. If MJ smelled a rat, somewhere in that woodpile, there was a rat. So I launched into the federal land issue, and man, I was into that for a year. Well, let me just tell you this. It took me about a year before I understood what it was that I was looking at. And when I understood what it was that I was looking at, I said, okay, I don't know if I want to do this, because whoever exposes this is probably going to end up in a 6-foot hole, right? So one night on a prayer walk, I had a little discussion with the divine. I said, okay, I want to make sure that this is what it is that you're leading me to and what it is you want me to do. And in order for that to occur, you and I need a face to face. And that was my prayer for a little while. And I told him, I'm not doing one more thing until you and I have a face to face. Well, the Lord provided, so be careful what you wish for, folks. The Lord provided a face to face, and actually had a moment where my spirit left my body and met with the management. And some words were exchanged and some information was exchanged, and I came back and I said, okay, I guess I'm doing this. So I launched into this thing full throttle and spent 13 years gathering information and getting behind administrative court cases to test out some of these theories, to shock test the system to see what, right,
Mhm.
being led by the divine in this whole thing, mind you. And I finally gathered enough information with the help of my good friend Dave Erlinson. Thank God for Dave Erlinson, because he helped me fill in some of the missing blanks and rounded edges, round some of those edges off, because it was kind of rough at first. I had gathered it, but I wasn't sure how to articulate it, let's just say.
Mhm.
So that 7 years I was involved with his legal case allowed us to consolidate this into a cogent narrative finally, because there's a legal element to this thing that has to be explained in order for a full picture to emerge. And so that brings me to the writing of the book, and I had no plan to write the book, none whatsoever. I just it was winter. I wasn't doing much. I had several different things I was trying to do. I was trying to create nanotech laboratories, and it was winter, so there wasn't anything going on there. And I had nothing but failure after failure in trying to work with Western mining, only to find out that there is no working with Western mining. And so I just had failure after failure. And I'm like, okay, well, what is it you want me to do, Lord? And a sudden and unmitigated desire to write a book suddenly hit me. And I sat on the couch all winter and I hammered out the basis of that book. And then, of course, Dave Erlinson and Dar Moon and a couple other people really, I sent it to them, say, read it, and they sent it back to me. But I can't understand half of what's in this. Okay, so I had to write it again, and this went on for months, right? But thank God for those men, because without that feedback, I couldn't have done it. It was too large and complicated of a task for me to do on my own. And regardless of what abilities people think I have limitations. Okay. I have limitations. I need people. I need people. Okay. So luckily I had high quality individuals at my disposal that were willing to do the work because they saw the value. And now the book is about ready to be printed. We're days away from printing. So that is my story, and I am sticking to it.
That's good. That's good, man. That's really good. So this book, it's not every day that anybody can just, decide to sit down and write a book. For me, trying to sit down and write a business plan was tough enough. but so it's interesting to know where you came from. There's all these labels. People are extreme and they're this or they're that or the other. And I think one of the things that I'm learning as I meet with people and have these interviews and stuff is people started with a desire to know more. They all had a moment where they were either personally affected or they weren't. I mean, and they just a bug bit them or something like me. Um, and what began as what, something's wrong here. I'm not really sure what it is. I have to figure it out. To the point where you were on this journey that obviously did so many things, helping you get where you are today, to the point where you're writing a book now so that you can help people understand um, not only the issue, but how you ended up getting to the issue. In other words, people can say, when you say something that sort of challenges somebody's narrative, they can say, "Oh, well, he's just this or he's just that." And so what in the reality is you're just like I was. I mean, you're just like I am and so many others. You cared about something kind of bit you, it went sideways, you thought something was wrong, you'd look into it a little bit, and then the worst part is you go down the rabbit hole only to find out you go down the rabbit hole for a little while, you turn around, you can't even see the light from the hole, right?
Yeah, exactly. The thing that I realize now is that it separated me from a lot of people from my past,
Yeah.
which this was the divine's doing, right? The
Right.
divine saw that that needed to happen for whatever reason. Okay, I make no judgments. That's not my purview to make those kind of judgments. I just, if I'm here on behalf of the divine to do a thing, then I'm going to carry it out, because that's one of my personality traits. One of my
Yeah.
personality traits is, if somebody with authority gives me the authority to do X, whatever X is, you can be sure of one thing: X is getting carried out one way or another.
Yeah.
That's just how I am.
Well, and I
So
think when I think I met you the first time we were at uh, the it was a Republican group um, back before I realized what a neocon was. Reggie Bingham.
yeah, the pachyderms.
Yeah, the pachyderms before it became the U.S. Club or whatever it was. And I remember you guys have to hear this. I because I'll never forget it. I got to get it on video. So I don't think I knew Ron, or I didn't know him very well. And I was there with my wife, and it was an interesting group. It was a group of, I would say, business people, right? They weren't just ragtag,
Yeah,
people like us.
no,
They were dressed in their business suits and whatever, and they were really there. And it was a professional run group. Reggie uh, did a fantastic job at making it a very professional atmosphere. It didn't mean that people
yeah.
like us
Her and
didn't.
her husband were great.
Yeah, they were, and like we didn't show up. So anyway, so she's talking about something, and I forget what it was. I wish I would have remembered because it would have brought everything together so well. But my wife and I were sitting in front of him, and there was this voice of incredible articulation that was coming out of the back corner. And inquiring minds like me want to know. I'm like, wait a minute, who is this guy anyway? So I look back there, and I'm always reminded God does a funny thing with me. Whenever I go into my little judgy mode, because I think we all have it, right? We all have our
Yeah,
presuppositions of when we look at somebody and what we feel like they are, right?
yeah.
And then guys like you open their mouth, and it's like it just shatters everything. So he's got this leather hat and this long hair, red hair, right? Long red hair,
Yeah. Well,
and
brownish with red tints. Yeah.
he
My
looked like
facial hair and my head hair are a little bit different in color, but go ahead.
he's a, and he looked like some. I mean, if I was being judgy, I'd say he just looks like a big burly biker dude. He's not somebody you really want to mess with. You know what I mean? And the things that he said were so amazing that I just couldn't. Uh, I can't believe that when I looked around the rest of the room, that people weren't as intrigued, or they didn't seem as intrigued as I was. And my wife got it too. She's like, "Who is that guy?" So, anyway, that was my exposure to Ron. So, I guess what I'm telling everybody is that when you interact, like we did, we got involved in a bunch of different groups along the way, but be really, really careful about what you think about somebody, because more than likely you're going to be wrong. So, but were you?
Indeed.
So you did the Sons of the Republic, but and you obviously attended other meetings like Reggie's meeting. Were you involved in other things too? Because for me, I was
Not
involved in
really.
everything I could be just because I wanted to know stuff, and I realized I didn't know anything. So, how did you react in
Well,
that
not
scenario?
not really. My foray, again, I understand that my main goal here was influence. So
Yeah.
if I'm showing up at a group, I'm trying to shake hands and, meet people and establish a level of influence for Sons of the Republic, to where we understand who the players are, so that we can interact, because policy, 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 policy. In order to change anything, you're making law and policy,
Hmm.
right? So we understand the Sons of the Republic was built upon the predicate that if you're not making law and you're not making policy, you're not changing jack shit. Pardon my
Hmm.
French. You're just not changing anything.
Hmm.
You can stomp your feet, you can throw a temper tantrum, you can say whatever you want on the radio and national television. It won't make one bit of difference unless you make policy or law, or the law becomes policy. either one.
Mhm.
And you could
Mhm.
do policy administratively, and then we can get into, function of government and all this sort of thing. I hope we don't do that, but so I'm there only to create influence for my group so that we can get engaged in policy and lawmaking.
So we get involved, and it's kind of funny, and I have to bring this up just because I think it's important for people that are asking, well, Tom, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, I did it like everybody else did. You just need to talk to them, and that's part of what the interview is about, is trying to encourage people to, in an effort to answer that question. How did you do it? Well, first of all, I did, right? I you acknowledge something, you're bit by something, you see something wrong or whatever it is, and you decide you want to act on it. It doesn't matter what it is, but as long as you're acting on it and I think the success comes from like you said, the who you're sitting in front of and who you can affect, who you can influence with what you're talking about. And that kind of set me on a tremendous trajectory anyway. And I took more of obviously a more public position, talking on the radio and jabbering on videos and that stuff. But and meanwhile, you're out there, reading this book. I what I'm part of the website for Idaho Ripple Effect is to be able to have a repository, and I'm so excited to share that with you. But I'm not going to do it right now. About all of the good things that are going to go up on that website. Maybe consider it a tribute to MJ. Um, but I remember when you were talking about some things that were really intriguing to me, and I think I still have the files in my old computer, and I need to transfer those now that I'm reminded of it. But you wrote some position papers, quite a few of them actually, and I think that I'd like to be able to make those available for people to read. If you haven't made those available yet, I still have them. You had written something about what was it, the slaughterhouse cases and Downs versus Bidwell, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was trying to focus on as far as policy was one of the problems that I saw with the state of Idaho was that the state of Idaho was not engaging its 10th Amendment power, even in the small area in which it could. And so I thought, okay, so let's get into the legal nuts and bolts of that, and let's now this is before I understood the vassal state arrangement completely, right?
Mm.
Now, if you don't have the vassal state arrangement, those policy papers, those position papers, they're legit, right? Because the Supreme Court has never overturned that stuff. That's still legit law. But it only works if you're not in a vassal state arrangement. And because, and I've talked about this in Auto and Fire a great deal. It's in the book a great deal. I detail it 100% and really
Mhm.
flesh it out because the Western states vassal state arrangement, that vassal state program that came on the heels of the Louisiana Purchase needs to be understood. Without it, we're not making any policy changes. You're just not. So,
Would you say that the position papers that you had written that I still have are relevant? Would you have, is that something that you look back in the rearview mirror as documents that have lost their relevance? Or
no, I think what I would say is, in fact, I'm glad you brought this up because I can dovetail this with the Dave Erlinson case. Now, I don't want to wax too legal here, but we're dealing with some complex subject matter, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to support Ripple because I think you can go a very long way in helping these subject matters, these complex subject matters, become more mainstream, right? By finding ways over time to simplify them, make them more digestible. Um, the Dave Erlinson case was predicated on the the state of Idaho not it came about and had to manifest in the way that it did because the state of Idaho AG's office would not support or defend Dave Erlinson's rights that were granted to him by state legislation. So the state legislature,
So there's no argument. There's really no argument on this. I mean, if the
yeah,
legislation is there, yeah, okay.
the state legislature in 2005 passed a water plan. It became law. And in that water plan, it gave him a privilege and immunity for the activity that he was engaged in. So he engaged in the activity. The federal government came after him, took money from him. He goes to the AG's office and says, hey, you need to support me here because the state of Idaho gave me this privilege and immunity. I exercised it and I didn't get my immunity. The state of Idaho basically gave him the middle finger.
And put him in
And
the
we
midst
went,
of a federal case, or admitted
well, he
put him
didn't
in
have a
it.
choice.
Yeah.
He didn't have a choice. He didn't have a choice. If the state of Idaho wasn't going to fight it, he had to.
Mhm.
So he came and got me and he goes, all right, you offered me to help. You offered to help me. And I spent $20,000 on this attorney and I lost. I get my rear end handed to me in a tribunal here.
Mhm.
I go, okay, well, he sent me all his documents. I reviewed them. I found an accelerated motion for decision, a motion for accelerated decision, and that had been accepted by the judge. So he had already lost. He hadn't even gone to trial yet. It was a tribunal. It was a EPA tribunal, right? So this is a territorial court. This is what this is. So this is the problem, right? With the state not understanding the powers that it has and how to enforce its own powers, like its own legislation against the federal government encroachment against citizens when the state passes a law that is a positive law to give their citizens privileges, immunities, and the federal government comes in and deprives them of that, and then the state goes, well, there's nothing we can do about it. It's like, no, that's not true. So those policy position papers that I created back then,
Mhm.
they are they are what the state is supposed to do
Oh, okay.
based on the
And
case law.
if
Based
they
on the
weren't in
case
the
law,
vassal state, okay, yeah.
if they were not in the vassal state arrangement.
I feel so good for knowing that. I just really do, you know, and it just makes me feel special. Plus your work is really amazing. And I think the one takeaway, I think we're a little over, but I think the takeaway that
Okay.
I really want for people is to recognize you. I think that your work, your tireless efforts in your book are amazing. I think that, when we talked about when you were on your path and I was on my path, I mean, I think we've known each other longer than 20 years. you
It's
know,
been a while,
and it's
man.
just like we're just kind of like going this way, and then all of a sudden we're like
Yeah.
this, and I got to tell you, I really like it. But and I'm hoping that 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 with what we're trying to do, that it's going to take everybody that's going their own separate way, and it's going to start funneling into where people have a greater understanding of what's going on. I think we've had these conversations before where I was working with the John Birch Society at the time. I don't think it's any secret at this point, but for people, but where they were talking about an issue, they were talking about conspiratorial issues, environmental this and environmental that, and you kind of you kind of made me feel bad, man. Not really,
Hey,
and
did
I'm
I?
kind of like, wait a minute. I'm
Sorry.
kind of like, wait a minute. I feel like we're the tip of the spear here. And then you said
Yeah.
something really interesting and basically you basically said, well, if that's true, then how did it get, I think I'm paraphrasing, but
You were talking about the government's powers being few and defined, and I'm like, okay, show me in the Constitution where they're defined and the limitations placed on those powers.
yeah.
And if
And
you just take the Commerce Clause and you go, okay, what's the limit on the Commerce Clause? There is none enumerated.
yeah. But
If
then
you
you
go
were
to property, none enumerated.
and then so I was talking about this and I thought if people just understood the UN, it's all about getting out of the UN and all that, and you're like, I suppose that's, it's good that you know that, Tom, but you got to understand how this thing started in America, you know. And then we talked about, FDR's, administrative state and all that. You're like, dude, you got to go back farther than that. And so the cool thing is that you kind of nudged me enough to make me go, I don't understand, to the point where now I understand this. What you're focusing on right now is where, and I hope I say this right, where all points converge.
Yeah,
I think we're in a really, really critical position now. We're looking at stuff that's coming out through Raul Labrador. Some of the things I'm looking at that are coming out on X from Congressman Fulcher and some of these other guys. Dude, if these people understood what you knew, they would be operating on an entirely different level. And I,
there is a guy that did an interview, and I'm gonna make you. I'll make sure you get this interview. And I actually posted the interview on Idaho on Fire
okay,
because this dude was in a previous administration, and the interviewer was like, okay, well, this group that you're talking about, and he's talking about neocons, right? So this group that you're talking about that's making all these policy changes, and it's sort of, so we're talking about 9/11 and this sort of thing. Where did they come from? This guy, the guy that's being interviewed says, they've always been there. If you go back to in NSC 68, you're going to find them, which is funny because if you go through if you read my book, you're going to find all of that. NSC 68, this group, all the way back to Raymond Mollet, who saw them when he was on the transition team for the FDR administration and the Woodrow Wilson administration. So they're meeting transition teams, and he sees these industrialists, right? Same group of people. They've always been there. So since the Civil War, this powerful party that has risen has had control of the congressional constitutional apparatus.
well,
And
and
they've been there ever since.
it's funny the timing of this, of the release of your book, and with this thing that everybody's excited about with Doge and President Trump, like him or not. I mean, there's some trees being shaken, and there's a lot of stuff that's coming out, and um, it's kind of funny because you've got your own um, with the information that's in your book. You're on your own trajectory. Obviously, we're focused on Idaho, which I think is important, and some people need to really pay attention
Yeah,
to what's going on in the state. But
yeah,
it'll be interesting to be able to see how people will react once they receive the kind of information that you've left with them. And one of the things that I really hope to do is help to make sure that happens. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. I think the more that we connect the loose ends,
mhm,
connect the dots,
yeah,
the better equipped we as a citizenry are going to be at fixing this once and for all.
mhm,
Because you can go into these administrative agencies and you can do like Doge is doing, but if you don't solve the underlying problem, it's just going to manifest again. Right.
yeah,
So I love what they're doing. I think it's very, very necessary, but we're
mhm,
going to have to take it a step further. Right.
mhm,
If we don't do that, again, like I said, we're just going to be dealing with this repetitively. So a lot of this stems from it's an artifact from the land program. It's what it is,
mhm,
right? So
yeah,
we just need to deal with that.
yeah. Well, I'm glad that it's one of my big fears was questioning the constitutionality, and of course, I guess we shouldn't probably get into that because we're a little over, but talking about the constitutionality of what Trump's doing, not saying they're not interesting and fun things to watch, but how easily things can swing back around with the stroke of a pen by our next king. And
Well, this is
that's a
interesting.
huge
There are
concern
people
for
out
me.
there that are screaming, "Oh, the executive branch doesn't have that kind of power." I'm like, well, two things. Number one, a lot of these agencies are executive agencies. Number
Mhm.
two, his job under Article 2 is to faithfully make sure that the laws are executed in the United States. That's his job.
It's a good point.
Faithful execution of the laws.
Yes, and I
Okay.
think
And
people assume just the ones that are written that need to be passed, rather than the ones that have already been written.
right. So if you've got an executive agency that is not faithfully executing the laws, he has absolute constitutional right to intervene.
Right, for sure.
So
Well, Ron, I appreciate your time today, man. It always seems like I'm cutting stuff short because we can go on for hours, but I do appreciate your time doing this. I appreciate your work. Um, the the website for your book is that the history? That's the history of federal lands in the United States.com, right?
Well, we had to do some changes because the with the the new publisher at the time we had a different publisher, didn't end up going that way, and so we had a website set up for that. But I'm working through Spines as the publisher. And
Mm.
so we're going to probably have a new website set up for that. It hasn't been established yet, so we're still working on it. As soon as I get that up, I'll make sure that you get it. We'll post it on Auto on Fire. We're going to put it everywhere. So I want to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity
Yeah.
to get a book and read about the true history of the federal land program, that the federal government and the state were supposed to make sure that we understood and just didn't do their job. So
It's mind blowing, man. It's absolutely mind blowing. Well, if people are encouraged and they do want copies of the book, and you don't really know how, you can contact me on my contact page. Since this will be on social media, you can put comments down there in the YouTube or Rumble or wherever it might be. Um, and I'd be happy to relay a message to Ron. Ron, do you have a way to be contacted for anybody that's
yeah,
interested?
you can contact me through my email address, which is mrrnielsen. That's Mr. R. Nielsen, MRR Nielsen, Nielsen 67 at gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. All right, man. Have a great week. I really
You too,
appreciate you.
brother.
Okay,
Good
man.
to see you, man.
See ya.
Yeah, bye.